and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. Electric vehicles, or EVs, are now a common sight on our roads. Perhaps you already drive one, or plan to buy one as your next car, or are just curious about them. After decades of dominance by vehicles with internal combustion engines, things are certainly changing. Internationally, the rise of Chinese EVs is seeing tariffs being imposed on imports of them by the United States and European Union, so EVs and their batteries are now becoming a major geopolitical issue as well. To discuss EVs, I'm joined by James Foster, who runs the EVDB website. Hi James, and welcome to the Of Interest podcast.
Yeah, hi Gareth, it's nice to have a chat.
Look, firstly, James, can you tell listeners a bit about yourself and about EVDB and I guess your own experiences with EVs?
Yeah, so evdb.nz is a website that I have maintained for a number of years. The idea was to bring clarity around what's going on in the marketplace in New Zealand, to interpret some of the stats coming out of the Ministry of Transport, and then right down to individual makes and models. So I've got a complete database of everything you can get in New Zealand, and you can check pricing and compare specs. And then also a little bit more long form kind of deep dive stuff that I publish out on a newsletter to subscribers. So it's a side project for me, something that I've kind of tinkered with for quite a while. And I think probably my own journey to electrification has informed a lot of that. I think way back when I first started, I felt a bit of a fraud. I started writing about EVs, but I didn't actually own one. So it's been my journey as well has really helped me down that pathway. My goal is just to bring clarity. I'm not out to tell people what car they should drive, or that's a very personal choice, but in the least bring clarity and information. Where at times when I was searching for a car, I struggled to find what I needed. So I thought, well, I'll make that myself. At times it's been a little bit onerous. Earlier this year, I began to shut it down actually because what started out as a little database became quite big. But I had some very kind people reach out to me and say, hey, keep going. We do actually value this information. So a bit of encouragement. It's been nice. So that's my journey.
Yeah, you've got a lot of detail on the site. It's certainly a very useful tool, so I'm glad you are keeping going. So
yeah,
you're saying you're an EV driver yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's great. Always good to bring the personal experience, I think, to an issue. So look, as a broad summary, James, how would you summarise, I guess, the lie of the land in the New Zealand EV market at the moment? Where are things at?
So in 2024, the market is very slow. So we've come off the back of some real breakout years, 2022 and 23, where EV uptake greatly picked in, and now in 2024, it's pretty flat and pretty slow. But I think with these things, this is a very long transition. My take is it's a generational transition. So when you stare too closely at the numbers, it's pretty wild, the ups and downs and roller coaster, and that's the same around the whole world. So New Zealand, this year is definitely very slow, and we can dig into that. And so we're probably sitting, in terms of our light vehicle fleet, we have about 1.7% of vehicles that are fully electric, and then we have a few more that are plug-in hybrid. And we tend to group those two together because they can both be charged externally with a plug. So a very small amount in our fleet, but compared to where we were 3 or 4 years ago, it's quite an increase.
Yeah, we did see a significant increase there, didn't we, in 2022, 2023?
Yeah.
I guess, you're saying it's slow this year. Is this really simply just down to the end of the Clean Car Discount, or is there more going on here?
Yeah, my personal belief is that we've got a lot of factors going on at once. So we had the rebates scheme, which started in 2021 and finished 23. Now, that brought a lot of interest to the market. So we had new makes coming to New Zealand. We had new EV models that were arriving here before Australia, for example. And then we had obviously consumers and businesses that went out and bought a car because it was cheaper than what it was before. So it brought a lot of interest into the market. And then obviously those stopped and the market slowed down significantly. Now, if we look at other countries, Germany, for example, had the same thing, same date, they stopped rebates, and you can look at the numbers there, and clearly they've flattened. So something has gotten more expensive, less people buying it. But our numbers have dropped well below the equivalency in Germany. So there's more going on. And my take is we had road user charges introduced on the 1st of April, and that's something that everyone's in agreement that all road users, we all want good roads and less potholes, so we're all happy to contribute. But there's a perception thing there that goes on as well, I think. So while EVs were exempted for quite a long time, suddenly there's effectively a new tax there for owners, which it equates to, I guess, if you're doing 14,000 a year, it's about another $1,000 a year tax. But again, we all have to contribute. So for some, there's a perception there that because we have quite a complex way now of funding these roads, where some road users are paying a road user charge, that's diesel and electric, and other road users, hybrid and petrol, are contributing via fuel excise at the pump when they fill up the petrol. So that, I think, probably worked really well. Like road user charges was introduced in 1977. But now we're starting to evolve to a fleet with a lot of electrified vehicles that all use different amounts of petrol. And so it's getting a little bit perhaps not the best solution there. So that's why we've had talk about potentially introducing that road user charges for everybody to even the playing field. But I think all that said, I think rucks on EVs will kind of be normalised, but we're still in that stage where people are getting their head round. And I've heard people say, "Oh, well, EV, you have to pay rucks on that. I don't think I want to go there." So that, I believe, is also having it. And then I'd see the third factor is probably around the whole global trends around EVs, which are pretty hard to read because different countries are all doing different things at once, and it's quite hard to get a read on that. But I think, again, my belief is that EV uptake, it's not a linear thing. It's not an exponential thing. It's happening in waves. And we've sort of been through the first wave, I think, around the world. And the learnings of that first wave is that actually we need to have comprehensive public charging infrastructure to make this work. And these vehicles are still too expensive. So before that kind of early majority begins to pick up, some more things have to happen. So I think those factors are definitely playing into where we're at with the New Zealand market. So I think 2024 probably be a pretty slow one, but this is a long game.
Just how much are sales of EVs down this year compared to last year?
So 2023, which was a crazy year, if we look at just New Zealand new passenger cars, which is it's a subset of our market, but that's people going and buying a new car.
Yep.
We had 27% were EVs last year, which is, I think that was beyond what anybody could ever anticipated. Is 1 in 4 vehicles, extraordinary. This year it's sitting under 8%. So that's quite a drop. It's not flatlining, but it's quite a drop. And I think for the reasons I'm suggesting, that's why. So it's a big change.
Yeah. You talked about public charging infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I was just, as you were making that point, I was just thinking, okay, I want to ask him, what's it going to take to kick the market off again? And is it going to be better public charging infrastructure and cheaper prices? Are those two key things that need to move now?
I think, yeah, definitely. The public charging one is definitely a much more longer term sort of thing. It's a perception thing. It's about arriving to a place where drivers have confidence that when they drive their car to another town on a road trip, that they will have no problem simply finding a charger, plugging in, and then getting a cup of coffee. In context, most EV driving is just charging at home. So for most of us, we're just simply driving around town, doing our commute, going to the shops, and we plug in each night, and that's that. But when you're going to head across town, cross country for that road trip, this is such a new market that we need to keep building that confidence. And that's definitely happening. I mean, there is so much more charging infrastructure being built, but I don't know if you can draw a direct cause and effect. If we only had 500 more chargers, more people would be. It's a perception thing, I think, and that will shift as charging becomes more normalised. And then pricing is a big one. It's absolutely a big one. So I think in the next 1, 2, 3 years, we will see a lot more lower cost EVs coming onto the market, and that will bring a lot more people into the market. So there will be that shift, but I think I've been watching this for so long now, and it's just slow. I guess it's slow. These are macro changes and huge changes to our transport infrastructure. And initially we sort of think, oh, this is just going to happen quickly. And it's not like that. It's a long, slow transition with these waves. But yeah, to answer your question, all those things will help. But, it's really hard to crystal ball where this is going.
And they take time, don't they?
They absolutely take time.
In terms of the market at the moment, I mean, what's a sort of price range for a new EV? I mean, what's the cheapest one go for, and what's the sort of upper end? And then, I mean, what is the secondhand market like now?
So with new cars, we have a number of models that are in the 40,000s. And that's definitely come down in the last few years. So the entry level has definitely dropped just by some of these are generally hatchbacks that have come on the market. But look, here's the thing is that I've done, because of my site, I'm able to pull out some interesting stats on this, is that the median price. So if we were to list all EVs we have available in New Zealand, put our finger on the middle one, it's still around $80,000, right? And that's because we have a lot of premium models that come to market. And so that's kind of skewing that median price. So that, yeah, on one hand, you can say, are EVs getting cheaper? Yes, they are at the entry level. But as a general sense, we still have a market that's skewed towards more premium end vehicles. So again, if I say that needs to change to have more adoption. So the secondhand market, we are, because of that flush of EVs coming into the market, we've got a secondhand market now with this year with substantially more vehicles available than what there were a few years ago. It's a secondhand market's a tricky one, because if you're a buyer, it's always the way with cars. If you're a buyer, there's some great options out there in the EV space. If you're a seller right now, we've seen, depressed demand obviously flows down into the secondhand market, and it's led to prices, I guess, depreciating. So we're at a bit of funny tension, but there's so many more options out there in the secondhand market now than what there used to be.
How cheap could I get a secondhand EV for now?
So if we look at one of the most common EVs purchased in New Zealand, which is the Nissan Leaf, is a used import from Japan. So you could get a Leaf for around 17,000. That will give you a couple of 100K range. That's a perfect town, day-to-day runner. Obviously, there are some cheaper older Leafs than that, but that's probably where you're looking at.
Okay. And what are the most popular models and brands in New Zealand now?
The Tesla still kind of holds that crown, Model 3 and the Model Y. And then in the last year, we saw a couple of years, BYD come to market and take a big chunk of market share. So, and along with MG. So both those brands now hold about 20% of the new EV fleet in New Zealand. The MG4 have been a very popular hatchback. I had a chance to have an extended test drive one of those, which is really kind of somebody. But this year, it's still Tesla at the top.
Okay. In terms of battery range now, what are the norms? What should you expect from your battery, and how quickly are, I guess, things improving on that front?
So when we talk about range, we're talking how far can the vehicle travel from 100% to zero before we need to charge. So at the entry level now, we're sort of talking in the 300s, 350 to 400. And in the more mid-level, we're getting up into 400, 500, and there's vehicles out there with a 600-kilometre range. So it's moving. I think the thing I've noticed about battery technology is there's momentum there for continued improvements, but it's incremental rather than like exponential. I don't know if you've followed over the years that you often read an article, someone's made a battery that does 1,000 kilometres and charges in 5 minutes, but the reality is from these things to production capacity is quite a different thing. But
it takes time.
It takes time.
Yeah.
So that progression is there, but it's incremental. It's slow. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a new chemistry, which is LFP or lithium ferrophosphate, not new, but new to the car market. And it's just in 2 years, we've now got a significant number of vehicles with this cheaper. It's basically cheaper batteries. They don't quite have the same energy density as other chemistries, but that has been shifting in the market quite quickly. So we can see definite track record of where that's going. It is, moving up and up and up, but slowly.
Yeah. On your website, you have lots of interesting things. But one of the things I found interesting was when you've got a section on various questions and about buying an EV. And you have one there about what causes the battery range to go down quickly. And in there you list a few things, including hills, headwinds and rain, open road driving at 100 kilometres an hour and low temperatures, and obviously having a heavy foot or pumping the heater or the aircon. So I guess these are things that whether, if you're used to driving a petrol car, you don't really think about these. But I guess you've got to factor these in when you're in an EV, especially when you're on the open road?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And so with electric vehicle technology, in order to extract maximum energy, there's been I think it's a good advancement, a lot of improvements around aerodynamic efficiency and to kind of extract out as much range as possible. And this is only an issue, I think, really because, those ranges are shorter between charges than what we used to in our perpetual car when we just drive and carry on and don't think about it too much. So when we have that lower range, we're more cognizant of how we're driving and those sort of things. And, all vehicles obviously use more energy in these conditions, driving into headwinds, going up hills, but we're a lot more aware of this with the electric car because of that lower range and charging opportunities and things like that. And the other thing to realize is battery regeneration. So electric cars excel it's kind of the opposite to petrol. They excel in these more urban environments where you're slowing down because they're able to capture all that kinetic energy and put it back into the battery. Conversely, on the open road, all you've got is aerodynamic. And the faster you go, the more energy is sort of being sucked from that, and that's a little bit to get your head around. But it's an issue only because those ranges are shorter, I think. So, I guess for me, at first you tend to worry a lot about these things, and then after a while you don't sort of worry so much, except for, I would say, when you're doing the big road trip and you need to put some consideration into how you're going to charge and what's going to happen. So there's a behavior shift there for sure.
In terms of the home charging, as you say, with most EV owners, they're recharging at home overnight, probably. What sort of impact does this have on your electricity bill?
It's funny, I was thinking about this morning, and when I first got an electric car, it was in 2019. It was like most people, just a humble third-hand Nissan Leaf. And ironically, our power bills went down. Now, the reason for that is because buying the car led me into looking at power usage and realizing that, probably like most people, I'm paying far too much. And so I investigated, out with the spreadsheet. And it kind of took me on a journey of finding a different power supply. And I've actually jumped through a few in that process. And then landing at a point where I discovered you can get cheaper power, these sort of time of use plans. It's what works for me. So at night, pay a half price rate, and some of them have free hours and things like that. So then I started the process of time shifting. So the car can charge at night, run the dryer at night. I've got a little timer on the hot water to only, heat up the water at night. And so the outcome when I came out of it, I was like, hang on, I'm driving around in the car now, but my power bills are actually less because I did that shifting. But that said, yeah, of course you're using more units of energy, and depending on your driving, if you do a big commute, obviously that's a lot more, but that totally incentivizes you to sort out your power situation. And in New Zealand, we have so many options. Yeah, it's confusing, but you've really got a lot of leeway there to change things. And then solar in the mix as well. So that's another whole game changer, in my opinion. Again, that's been part of my journey, is eventually getting some panels on the garage roof. It's all part of that electrification journey.
Yeah. And what about insurance and repairs? Now, we do write about insurance, and one of my colleagues recently wrote about car insurance, and it discovered that EV insurance is widely available. It wasn't a few years ago. It is now. So that's progress, but it tends to be a bit more expensive than for petrol cars. And I believe sometimes repairs can be as well. How significant are these issues for the growth of the EV industry, and how much are they changing?
That's quite a difficult one, because from an individual's perspective, your insurance premiums are based on your driving profile, they're based on where you live, and they're based on the car that you own. And so those three factors, and often people that have gone to an EV, they're buying a more expensive car and the insurance has gone up. But that said, particularly I think around companies and fleets where the insurance model is quite a bit different. Yeah, I've heard that for some. I think it's easy often with these things to have a broad brush approach and to say, right, all EVs are this, all that. But often when you dig into it, you find actually there might be specific models that perhaps the componentry materials or bodywork is more expensive to repair, and that's led to higher premiums. I think for me, from a personal consumer approach, it sort of hasn't been an issue. My car's insured for an agreed value and doesn't feel much different to my previous car, but I suspect that for fleets, they're probably looking for EV-specific policies that are going to give them some certainty around premiums. So I personally don't feel that impacts, because when we look at running costs about EV, there's a lot of different factors going on here. You can run an electric car if you have the ability to charge at home, which is basically as long as you've got a 3-pin plug that you can get your car near to, and that's not everybody, but the majority. You can charge your car you can change your power plan to get some really cheap. And then maintenance is lower because you're not having to change oil and spark plugs and things like that. But I think a lot of those things can be a little bit swings and roundabouts. But definitely, I don't feel that insurance is necessarily impacting a consumer's decision. But I'm not an expert on that, so I don't pretend to be.
We obviously we typically, thus far, we've been talking about cars, but obviously other forms of electric vehicles are being developed. I think utes utes are obviously very popular in New Zealand, so that's a topical one. Vans, trucks, buses, and micro cars, little cars as well. Where are things at with these in a New Zealand context?
So all those things, or little cars?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the cars, the utes, vans, that sort of thing. Where are we at there?
Yep. So that's part of our market here in New Zealand is absolutely we've got all these different vehicles. It's what makes it quite challenging to pull out the trends. So we have new passenger cars, and we have a huge used import market where, probably about 45% of our cars registered every year are imported from typically Japan. And then we have our light commercial market where we've got predominantly utes and to a smaller degree vans, and then our heavy vehicle market. So all of those different things are happening. So if we look at utes, the ute models are typically the most popular light vehicle registered each month in New Zealand. Now, we've had very little change in electrification there. We've had one fully electric ute that came to market, which is the LDV. And I think in numbers, it's probably quite modest numbers. The reason around that is the usage scenario of a ute is different to that of a passenger car. So you have a vehicle with, I guess, the aerodynamics, of a brick. And you have the requirement of towing and all these things. And so it's made sense that most utes have been diesel vehicles. So when manufacturers are looking at battery electric vehicles, you get this vicious cycle where to get the range and towing requirements that we need a bigger battery. A bigger battery means a much heavier vehicle, and sort of round we go in circles, and then it becomes uneconomic. So overseas, there's some big hulking electric utes in the US, but in New Zealand, again, my personal belief, I think the pathway there may be more hybrid kind of utes. I know BYD are bringing one in called the Shark, and so combining these two powertrains to try and offer some of the benefits of electric. They'll have V2L, so you can, have sockets in your ute where you can charge your tools, and they still have the combustion engine in there. And so a mix of these, and that could end up being, I think, the pathway for New Zealand. But right now, there's statistically insignificant electrification there. We do have a lot of electric vans on the market, and I was just looking at the numbers, and there's definitely pick up there. It makes a lot of sense for that, like last mile delivery locally to be electric. And then the other thing it is worth pointing out is used imports. So one of the things that has led to, I guess, a lower EV uptake is that we import a lot of cars out of Japan, and Japan has had very little EV adoption. I think probably around 1% to 2%. So for us, that means there's very little stock of. There's really only the Nissan Leaf and a few other things that come out of there. And so that's affected our market too, whether or not that will change in the future. But one thing you talked about, sort of micro cars, is they do have in Japan these KEI class of vehicles, which are smaller vehicles. And we have a few of those that have been brought to New Zealand. But I think when we talk about really small cars, we're having a cultural conversation more than an electric conversation. Our vehicles have been trending larger for decades now. And so, yeah, I think that's less about going EV than it is about what sort of vehicles would we like to have on our roads and we feel safe in.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
think that's an interesting point.
yeah,
It's interesting, really, too, what you say about Japan. Obviously, yeah, we get a lot of vehicles from Japan and New Zealand,
yeah,
and have done for a long time now. But obviously, the big thing going on internationally with EVs right now is China. Um, and I noted in my introduction the sort of growing geopolitical tensions with China on the one side, the US, EU, and I see this week Canada on the other, implementing tariffs on imports of Chinese-made vehicles and batteries as well. I'm just wondering, I mean, how much market share do Chinese EVs have in New Zealand now? Certainly, I've become very aware of them because my sister-in-law bought a BYD earlier in the year, which appears to me to be a really nice car. I'm not an expert, but there are definitely a lot more of them on the roads here now.
yeah, yeah. So there's been a rapid shift, and I think the mere fact that we've seen tariffs go up in the US and EU is testament to something pretty significant going on, and it's happened quite quickly. So, yeah, China for a long time has, I guess, been supporting a transition to electric vehicles, and it's happened quite fast. And the market in there it's insane. There's an enormous amount of electric vehicle brands, and they also have got the whole supply chain covered. You know, much of the world's batteries come out of China. So they've been going at an incredible pace, and then the last couple of years have started to basically open the export floodgates. And like I said, within, I guess at the beginning of 2022, we didn't really have any, I guess, Chinese brand vehicles. And then now 20% of those on the road are, it's happened in 2 years. And that kind of shows you, I guess, why maybe the US have freaked out and implemented protectionist policies to try and protect their own car market. And the amount of momentum coming out of China is extraordinary. And the build quality, I think, wouldn't say taking people by surprise, but I know, you know, historically in New Zealand, when we have new brands come to market, at first we're sort of like, oh, whether, you know, way back with the Japanese brands or Korean brands, at first you're kind of like, oh, I don't know about this. And then eventually they become normalized. They just become another brand that's part of the story. And oh yeah, this is a good car. And we're seeing the same thing happen with the Chinese brands. And for example, the MG4, which is MG is a brand many will remember as being a British Morris garage as it was. The brand's owned by SAIC, a Chinese company, and that vehicle in particular has, you know, stacked up a huge amount of awards in different car markets in the world. So suddenly the world's taken notice and realised these are actually pretty good vehicles, and they're able to produce them and sell them at a much lower price point than other countries. So that's happened very fast. So I mean, I would expect from that in New Zealand, yeah, we will see more and more brands come potentially to the country. I know there's some new brands like XPeng, Zika, which are about to open in Australia. And the build quality is right up there. And I think the next thing eventually in the pipeline, we're going to see that price point of lower cost EVs come out of China. So I think that's going to affect definitely the New Zealand market.
It's really an interesting development. In preparing for this podcast, I read an article by a guy called Scott Kennedy, who's a China specialist at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. And he made a point that you made there as well in a slightly different way. He said, if Chinese EVs were pieces of junk, then they would not be a serious challenge to the rest of the world's automakers. For many years, Chinese auto firms languished far behind the global trendsetters in Europe, East Asia, and North America, but Chinese firms have narrowed the gap in autos in general and moved ahead in EVs. So that is, I think, a really interesting quote. And I think also your point, I mean, assuming that New Zealand stays out of this kind of, you know, tit for tat tariffs, and we have a free trade deal with China, we're very economically close to China. So I would assume that we will. Then there's really probably a lot of scope here for the volume of Chinese EVs in New Zealand to rapidly increase. And perhaps that will actually see the price come down as well. And what I guess I'm really interested in is, you talked about, 40,000 plus for a new car and 17,000 for a second-hand EV. So is it going to take something like a flood of Chinese imports to make them affordable, I guess, for people on medium to lower incomes?
Well, if we look at the lie of the land now, all the entry-level EVs we have, not all of them, just in a broad sense, they're Chinese vehicles. It's those cars that have brought down our average. I keep a sort of a running tally all the time of the 10 cheapest EVs in New Zealand, and then I get an average from that, and that gives me an indication of where we're at. Those are all Chinese vehicles. So it's logical to assume then, obviously we need our market to sort of pick up a little for dealers, but it's logical to assume that that graph is going to keep going down, that we are going to get cheaper vehicles, and what we've already seen is that people will buy them, and that will bring down the price. I think we're beginning to see some of the other manufacturers around the world finally start to look at lower cost EVs, because I guess, I don't know how much I can speak to this, but I would suspect that margins on car sellers are probably on large SUVs and premium EVs and maybe lower cost petrol cars, right? So car companies, they're there to bring profits to shareholders and will sell what they can sell to the market with the appropriate margin. So to manufacture low cost EVs means lower margin. So in New Zealand, we've seen some actually fantastic electric cars come to this country, but they're obviously for me well out of scope for me. I can only dream. But I think some of those other manufacturers, and we're talking here the Korean, Hyundai, Kia, and then potentially the mythical Tesla, lower cost Tesla car, I think we will see that, because that's required for the next wave of EV adoption in the world. We need cheaper cars. We've talked a lot about price parity. That's always been the conversation. And by that, we mean, an electric vehicle stacked up behind an equivalent petrol vehicle. Right now, there's still a premium for the electric. And so we talk about price parity and when that point reaches. And I think we will reach that point, but only in some markets and only in some model shapes, if that makes sense. So, we probably will see, certain cars reach that point. And when that comes, that will be a trigger for increased, because people want to know, well, what's the benefits? Why do I want to pay an extra, whatever, $20,000 for a car? And that's a personal thing. There are many benefits. But for the mainstream market to, the majority to start coming on board, you want to see that price parity. I don't know about you. It's like, what you have to sort of weigh up the benefits of that. And there are many to electric, don't get me wrong. I think for me, I've found it helpful to view electric vehicles. There's two different lenses. We can look at it with one lens, which is the value proposition. Right, so here's a car that it's quiet, it doesn't vibrate, it's very smooth and nimble to drive and doesn't have any toxic fumes out the back, but some behavior changes required. Get your head around charging. It's different to filling up at the petrol station. It takes longer to charge, all those sort of things. So you kind of wrestle with those things. That's one lens. The other lens is the world's broader electrification journey, right? Decarbonisation. And I think sometimes that's where things have got messy, because that's when we start to get the political things come in. But I think as people begin to see, I think energy sovereignty is another one too. That's something that I find quite profound since I got the solar panels on the roof. I feel like I'm in science fiction, that I've got the sun's out, I've actually got the sun's rays going into my house's power and then into a battery in my car, and I drive it, compared to drilling oil, refining it, putting it on a ship, sending it over, driving it down. That's something and that's like another lens. So, that's why our EV market is complicated. It's not just, here's a different car. Do I want it? Nah. Or it's what's made it so tricky. And so we have EV policy, which is like a political football, and our, politics kicked from one side to the other. And I guess that's brought a lot of confusion around information and agendas and all those things, But I say, dig in, have a look at the information, and decide for yourself what's the path forward.
Yeah, look, that's I think your point there about your solar panels and on your roof and powering your house and your car. I think that sort of thing has a lot of appeal to people. And obviously, as you note, the world is in a decarbonisation push where with targets to get to net zero. Thus, the expectation is that the demand for EVs is going to increase. I just to wrap up, I like to get your crystal ball out. I mean, where do you see our our EV fleet in, say, 10 to 20 years from now? Will our electricity generation cope as it grows? And also, there's other technologies out there. I was reading about fuel cell electric vehicles, which are powered by hydrogen. Are we going to see uptake of things like that in New Zealand too?
It's officially hydrogen. So H2 gas powers an electric powertrain in a car. I think in terms of passenger cars, my feel on that is that sort of ship has sailed in terms of passenger cars. So, in order to get hydrogen gas to put in your car, you need a lot of electricity to get that hydrogen out of water. So you might stand back and say, well, hang on, if you're already putting electricity like that, why not just put it into a battery? But that said, for heavy transport, definitely, and all other forms of transport, a huge potential there, if it can be done in an economic way. But I personally don't think we'll ever see hydrogen passenger cars. Battery electrics have kind of jumped ahead there. In terms of crystal ball, let's just say that all over the years, all the targets I've come across and projections have been wrong, because the market is chaotic. It's not been a linear uptake. There's not been an exponential uptake. Very, very hard to predict. And because of, policy change and things like that, I think, and then again, this is just my thoughts, random as they are, I think the New Zealand fleet, we will see a mix of vehicles. I think what we're already seeing in the numbers is a move towards hybrid cars. So these are cars, what I mean by these are non-plug-in cars, fueled with petrol, but have a small battery to lower and increase fuel efficiency. We're definitely seeing a fairly linear uptake on those. So it's reasonable to presume that will continue. So what our fleet will probably look like is a mix of hybrid and fully electric and plug-in. And we've definitely seen the peak of petrol cars. I can see that in the numbers. They've peaked, petrol-only cars, they've peaked in our fleet. So we can presume that will continue to go down. So there is that journey, but you talked about, what was it, the grid. So I don't think anyone's suggesting that we all go out and get an EV tomorrow. I think we clearly have to have a resilient, sustainable power grid in tandem with going electric, and just some of the fragility we see at times. I look at my calendar and I think, what year is this? Are we in the 1950s? It's sometimes inexplicable to me that we haven't had that investment in generation. But just another side to that is that electrification journey. An EV can be, if it's done right, it can actually be part of that resiliency. So you realize these are batteries on wheels. So imagine the technology if in 5 or 10 years' time, we've got 100,000 people with a plugged-in car. It's 5 p.m. at winter, and the grid or Transpower sends the signal, we need more power, and we pull out a couple of kilowatts of power out of every one of those cars. That's the sort of future that we want. And that requires, obviously, regulation and a lot of things around that. What we don't want is the opposite, where every EV owner comes home 5 p.m., turns their charger on all at the same time. So it's not so much about the overall power. We don't want it consumed all at once. And that comes about with having sort of robust charging setups at home, incentivizing when we're charging. And we are seeing that now. I know my power provider, they just started a thing where they are bringing in incentives to when we're using our power. And those little levers, it's like the carrot approach rather than the stick. If we get that right, it can be a win-win. But if we move probably too fast, I hope you sort of understand what I'm saying. We have to have that resiliency in our power grid. And we are shifting to more renewable in terms of solar and wind, but we've got a long way to go in that department. And also just to mention, we have things like data centers coming on stream, with our new sort of AI world, which require enormous amounts of power. So there's a lot more going on in there, and we do need solutions for that, for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot going on. Look, James, thanks so much. That was fantastic. It's very interesting to dig into the nitty-gritty details of the EV market. That is James Foster, who runs the EVDB website. And I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest podcast.